Hello, and welcome back to Fulfillment Therapy. My name is Maddie, Kendra Nilsson's COO, and today you'll be listening to episode 167, From Trauma to Triumph, Overcoming Past Wounds for Better Parenting with Abbie Tait. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to Fulfillment Therapy. Today I have an incredibly beautiful, wonderful, amazing person that has, I must say, incredible genes, and she has a fantastic sister as well. Today I have on my sister, and we've had her on before. Abbie, how long ago was it that we had you on? It was in the summer or?
So I think it was about a year ago. I was just, it was September 4th.
Okay.
I guess that's when you put it on your podcast.
So we have her on today to come back, and I have just been feeling this need to have her back on. And it's kind of weird because in the past, I have known very specifically what I wanted somebody to talk on generally. But with Abbie, I have no idea, and I'm trusting my intuition here. And I feel like it needs to be this organic conversation about the things that she's going through and insights that she's had. But I'm letting go of control and just practicing that acceptance and that surrender. And I feel like conversations with Abbie are often like this. Like they just are vulnerable and honest and real. And I'm excited to have that today on the show. But specifically what we are talking about, I know it's like somewhat general, but is her experience that she's had recently and her insights with both divorce and her past relationship. And I'll let you speak to that, Abbie, a little bit wherever you want to go. And I'm excited to hear what you have to share. Is there anything you'd like to share before we jump right in?
So I am Kendra's younger sister. We're 3 years apart, and I am a mother of 4. I'm divorced. I used to be an active member of the church and have for the last 6-ish years been inactive. I am a cosmetologist and work for myself, and I recently started another job working for an event company, and I plan the executive meetings for Microsoft.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the update. And I did not realize. So how long ago were you divorced?
Whenever people ask me this, I have the hardest time recalling the exact time frame because it was honestly just so traumatic that I really struggle with that whole timeline. So I don't think the divorce was fully finalized until 2020, like early 2020, but we were separated for a while before then.
Okay. I was thinking that was around the same timeline as you being inactive, but is that not right?
I started really questioning things and kind of pulling away when I was still married.
Oh.
So it was, I want to say like 2018.
Okay. So when I asked you to come on, we were specifically talking about, like I just mentioned, your relationships, briefly your divorce, but especially this past relationship that has been very tumultuous from the very beginning. And I cannot begin to speak to that. I haven't had a situation like that. And it's something that I've watched you grow from tremendously as you've come through this. Like I've seen this softening, this vulnerability, this openness, just this total shift in you. And I feel like there's a lot of listeners that this would really resonate with that are struggling, whether it's with marital problems or even really major challenges in their relationship or even just dating, that I feel like you could speak to that maybe I could not. And do you mind just giving us a little rundown, especially of this past relationship and even how that relates to your divorce?
Yeah. So just to kind of get to the point, so we're not wasting too much time. I had an affair. So I was married for 15 years, and it was kind of the perfect storm of events. I was kind of questioning things in the church, and I had started to kind of isolate myself. I think now that I understand trauma and triggers and just psychology in general, I can see it all a little more clearly now and kind of see how everything came together the way that it did. But I mean, I built a friendship with this guy centered around like conversation around the church and started to feel like he was the only person I could sort of have this really real conversation with. And we built a friendship, and then it turned into an affair. And it wasn't something I ever believed I would be capable of. And it's something I still carry a lot of shame and guilt for. And to be honest, I'm not fully convinced, and I hope that this changes, but I'm not fully convinced that I will ever be able to forgive myself. But it's a part of my story, and I have learned a lot from it. So that was the catalyst, like, for my divorce, and a lot happened in that time frame. But I built this relationship with this other person, and I bought into this fantasy and this other version of myself that I had, like, the freedom to explore. And it was exciting. And I had mostly structured my life around trying to be the perfect mother and the perfect wife and the perfect LDS woman. And I don't think I ever had a very strong sense of who Abbie was. And with this other person, I had this freedom to not, it was almost like my choices didn't have as much weight. It was like they were free of consequence or something. And that's how I know it was a fantasy, is it felt like I could just exist in this space and explore these curious sides of me that I just didn't even really know were there. And I probably did know they were there. I think they probably scared me from the religious background and stuff. I didn't get curious about them. I just kind of shoved them down. Anyway, fast forward, we go through the divorce. It's terribly traumatic. I feel a lot of guilt for destroying my family, and I deeply commit to this new relationship. I think for multiple reasons. One being that it was the choice that I made, and that it felt like it had to be worth it.
So really quickly, just so listeners understand. So this relationship was with the person that you had an affair with.
Yes. So we paused things for a while I tried to figure out if I was going to work on things in my marriage or what was going to happen there. And then once I was separated and moved out, like, we started the relationship again. And I was deeply committed to trying to create a healthy relationship, which, I mean, knowing what I know now, and maybe there are some couples that can do it, but I'm pretty convinced that it's nearly impossible to cultivate a healthy relationship that starts in dishonesty. And I think that there were a lot of red flags, a lot of things I chose to ignore because I wanted so badly to also buy into this fantasy and believe that it was possible to stay living in it. And I also believe that part of that came from the fact that I think I had this really strong desire, wishing that my ex-husband had that same desire to fight for us. And so I think that fed the fire a little bit in me, this drive of just like, you can make any relationship work, no matter how hard it is, if both people are committed to making it work. And this person did a really good job of convincing me that he was willing to make it work. And I do believe that he loved me to the best of his ability. But ultimately, that wasn't enough or really acceptable and I don't think it would be acceptable for any woman. But the reality is I was in a very abusive relationship, and I believed I deserved it because I think I was punishing myself. So from pretty early on, I put up with a lot. A lot of it I kept to myself, but also I did really love him, and there were a lot of great parts of the relationship, and I felt like he fed the parts of me that were starving in my marriage. Ultimately, I was really lonely in my marriage, and it was no lack of me loving my spouse, but I was very lonely. So insert this other person, and he fed these parts of me that were so hungry. And so I would say a large percentage of the time, our relationship felt great. But the times that it was bad, it was really bad. And those things got worse. And he was a pathological liar. He is a pathological liar. And no matter how much I tried to improve myself, that was never going to change that in him. And I seemed to have this belief that the more I perfected myself, then I could somehow on my own make the relationship healthy. But his lying never stopped. His tactics never stopped. I found out about a lot of other women. so many lies. And we started going to counseling together pretty early on. So I found out about other women, like I want to say a year and a half in or something like that. Tried to work through it, thought we were working through it. And just a month later, would found out about another woman. And that kind of just continued for the next 5 years. And there was some physical abuse in there as well. And I made excuses for it. I convinced myself it was just that he didn't understand his own strength, or like that I just made a lot of excuses. I would end things and I'd pull away, and then I'd end up just going right back to him. And I guess for time's sake, there's no reason to go into all the details of the abuse itself, other than it's enough to just say that it was very clearly unhealthy. And I saw that, but I was also really entangled in just a kind of a typical abuse cycle of, I guess, essentially the dopamine rush of how, I mean, it would get so bad and then it would blow up and then we'd repair, and that rush of like, okay, and now it's better and we can fix this. And it was like a honeymoon stage all over again. And I kept clinging to hope that we were on our way there. Like we were almost healthy. Like if I just stuck it out a little longer, we would have been the couple to make it. And realizing how much I wanted to believe that I was special. Like I wanted to believe in that fantasy again. I wanted to believe that I was so special, that I was going to be the one to make it through a situation like this and come out the other side.
First and foremost, Abbie, truly, like, thank you for sharing, because I think this is so vulnerable. Like, this would be hard for anybody. And knowing, like, oh, my ex might listen to this, my ex-husband, my ex-boyfriend, like, how will they respond to it? Like, what will people think? And just letting go of all of that is massively courageous and beautiful. And also, I have to say, like, your story is going to be totally different than your ex-husband's story or your ex-boyfriend's story. Like, they all have their story and their wounds and their perspective and their side of the street. Like, I get that as a therapist. I understand that it can look so different for each person. And yeah, the story is about you. So hopefully, if they're listening, they will understand that as well. But I know everybody asks this, and like every show there is out there, every book you ever read, the person on the other side is always saying, well, why did you stay? Why didn't you leave? Like, surely you should have known that that was like going to just result in more heartache. And now I watched you through this whole thing and I have an idea of why, especially as a therapist. But what would you say to listeners wondering that?
Well, I'd say a lot of different things. I guess the first thing that comes to mind is it is so much more complex than I would have judged it in the exact same way if I hadn't been through it. And I mean, the last time I was on your podcast, I was out and I was feeling strong and I was doing really well. And then things happened. Some health things came up and I ended up back in that relationship again. And it just, there are a lot of layers to it. He gave me every reason to leave and I didn't. It's almost like I clung to him more. And I'm still trying to dissect all of the different reasons why I stayed. And I do believe I'm making a lot of progress on that. But I know that there's a lot. I'm in a program right now where it's a 7-week, it's kind of like a glorified book club, I guess I'd say. A 7-week program about manifesting the right people into your life. And it's focused around this book called Calling in the One. And we have a discussion group once a week for an hour and a half. And there's also a lot of practices and lessons. Like there's a weekly lesson and practice. So it calls a lot of action. Like you have to really do a lot of reflective work, a lot of really deep healing, which I didn't expect from this experience, but very deep healing is in action with this. And it's made me more aware of how really my childhood wounds are the driving force behind a lot of it, which is pretty basic, right? Like we all kind of know that that's our issue. But when I really got in deep with it and broke it down, it makes sense that I manifested a person like my ex into my life because I was actively doing all of those things to myself internally. Like I was using myself in the ways that he was abusing me already. So I think, unfortunately, I had very high tolerance for abuse. We grew up in a pretty rough home. And we already were exposed and pretty accustomed to abuse. And in my marriage, that did not exist. There was definitely neglect, but not abuse. That really, he was my first, like, he felt like my very first safe, stable place. And I don't know why. I mean, I can guess that maybe the reason I ended up leaving that is maybe because it was the stability almost maybe was uncomfortable for me, or I got bored with it. I don't know. We could evaluate that separately, but I was for sure lonely. That's not something I'm making up. But this work that I'm doing in this discussion group, though, has been extremely enlightening. And I am doing a lot of just really hard work on myself right now and focusing on me and my wounds and healing the deepest parts of me so that I can break these cycles and manifest like better people into my life and kind of just put out an energy that so that I don't repeat these same type of things.
My question for you is like, we're all human. We're all susceptible to making big mistakes, and we all think that we won't. And I sincerely hope I never will. And yet I think for many listeners, like, how do we guard against that? Or what could they do? What advice would you have for them? For those that are like feeling maybe lonely in their marriage or feeling conflicted, maybe on this faith journey, the wisdom that you have now through those terrible, horrific experiences that you had, what would you tell maybe your past self or those listeners that are in a similar boat?
Oh, so a quick thought. I find a lot of comfort in visualizing like my wiser self, like coming to me now and comforting me and giving me advice. And I also, same thing, like for my current self to do the same for my younger self. And at least my advice would have been to myself, and I can say that, and hopefully that's helpful to someone else listening, is I would go back to myself and I would really encourage me to not limit my spouse's ability to be understanding and compassionate. I wish I hadn't made any assumptions about what that would look like. I think I've always been a pretty good communicator. There was no lack of communication. I expressed to him what my needs were. Unfortunately, my needs were not a priority to him, and that is really hurtful. And ultimately, that probably, had this affair never happened, if that had continued, ultimately, we probably wouldn't have been together anyway. That doesn't minimize at all like what I did, but not caring about your spouse's needs is kind of a big deal. But I still wish, like, I don't know what that outcome would have been. I wish more than anything that I had chosen to really lean into him with full vulnerability of, here are my views on the church, here are my concerns, here are my fears. And also, even once the affair started, I wish I had been strong enough to say, this relationship has become inappropriate and it's not what I want. Because I remember really wishing that my spouse would save me from the situation I was in. Okay, I remember just this panicked feeling and being like, I want out of this and I don't know how to get out. And I felt like the choice had already been made. Like I had to go all in on the affair because now it was too late. And I wish I had trusted the relationship and love that I had with my spouse and given him the opportunity to choose. I never really gave him a choice. And that's something I'm going to regret forever. So I think it's really important to not limit someone else's capacity to forgive. My advice would be really like to dive into the fear, like lean so far into it, just like go for it. Because the alternative is probably so much worse than just, if I was continuing with the affair, I was going to lose the marriage anyway. So why not just fully expose yourself to your spouse? And that could bring you guys so much closer. Or you can respectfully decide to go separate ways. And either way is very respectable. So that would be my advice.
I think it's interesting that that's one of your big takeaways, because now, looking at you, our relationship has gotten better and better and better since we have left home, I feel like, personally. But in that, like, I felt some distance from you because I didn't always feel that vulnerability. And now I feel like it's so on the other side, like that vulnerability that you wish that you had at the time, like dive into that fear and be I mean, you're talking about the ultimate vulnerability. I get that. Like talking to your spouse about how you've been unfaithful and just like, I can't imagine how terrible that would feel. And leaning into that vulnerability is what you're saying. And now fast forward these years, and like that is the one thing that I feel from you the most, like this ability to be vulnerable, where before there was like walls or this harder exterior, and we all have them at different times, but like you've really mastered that, I feel like. And I love that your current self would tell your past self that, because I see that happening. And it hasn't been a pleasant road. And I just love that you can speak to that for listeners, because I know faith and marriage issues are big things that come up for my clients and for listeners. So thank you for sharing that. I know that probably the last thing you want to do is publicly talk about these things that have happened to you. You also said my childhood wounds were at the heart of it. And that is also no easy feat or no easy task to dive into that and be able to like take ownership for the parts that are yours. You didn't sign up for the abuse that we experienced, mostly by our stepdad. You didn't sign up for different neglect that it was experienced in marriage or in childhood. Different things that have happened to us. It's not anything that you ever wanted, and yet it shaped how you showed up as a partner in your marriage. And now here you are, like as an adult, still trying to navigate these things. Like the name of the book always comes to mind, When the Past is Present. So like when we haven't worked through our wounds, it is still so present in our life. And so you're chipping away at those different layers to get to the core of it. But I guess my question for you now, and I know this is another loaded one, I just have really hard ones for you today, but how will you continue? Like, how will you stay out now? What's going to keep you from jumping you back into something that's comfortable when you feel like lonely or triggered or scared? Because I'm sure it's going to happen constantly, right?
Yeah. When I was listening back on the podcast that I did with you last time, I was talking about how strong I was feeling and all the things that I was doing and practicing. I said that I was practicing self-soothing, all of those things. And I almost think it's slightly laughable, because now that I know how deeply it all, like when you're really doing the work, how much it hurts and how hard real self-soothing is. I wasn't doing it before in the same way that I'm doing it now. And this deep reflection and this work that I'm doing and the connections I am making, I am fully focused on, I know I keep saying it, but like deeply, deeply healing myself, that there's no way the healed version of myself is going to accept that. There's no way. There's no way that she will accept that kind of relationship. I know we're kind of short on time, but one of the big things I wanted to kind of touch on was, so I recently went to Idaho Falls to have a conversation with my mother and my sister. And that was the motivation of going, because of this healing work that I'm doing. Because there was a practice where we had to think about unspoken or spoken agreements that we had with our caretakers. And the unspoken agreement with my mother was that the less I required of her, the easier I would be to love. And I realized that I was operating from that same belief in all of my relationships. And I was minimizing my own needs and prioritizing their needs in order to feel like I was valuable enough in the relationship, that I was proving my worth, that the hope was then they wouldn't leave or that they wouldn't abandon me. So just a lot of really deep wounds around abandonment and rejection. And then we had to select 3 words from a list that pertain to our caretakers around how we believed they felt about raising us, but also how we believe they showed up in raising us. And so when I selected these words and then wrote them out, and then the next part was, how do these things still apply in your life now? And as I wrote them out, I realized that that's when it clicked for me that I was actively doing all of the abusive behavior internally to myself, and how all of that abuse really never stopped because it just continued with me. So, a long-winded answer to that, I don't see a scenario where I continue on in this work and continue on working on myself and healing these really deep parts of myself that would also accept the type of relationship that I was in.
There are so many layers to this that I could address and speak to, and it's painful to not go to all of them and have this be a several-hour episode. But I do want to share or reiterate a couple of things that you said. It's interesting that you went here. I didn't realize you were going to talk to our mother and our sister about these things because I've also been having similar thoughts recently about there's another layer of work that I need to do. I've been listening to this book, Everything Isn't Terrible, and it just talks a lot about differentiation and triangulation. And I just realized there are some conversations that I haven't had recently and that I feel like need to be had in a deeper way. And you're very much on the same page, it sounds like. But that core belief, the less I required of my mother, the easier I'd be to love. And how, again, talking about trauma, how that carried out through all, just like you said, all your relationships, and how if you just didn't require much, then people would love you more. And how that is also the Achilles heel, or the reason why many of them failed, because that's not going to work long term, right? That people pleasing, or not being authentic and genuine about your needs, not communicating in the way that people can understand, not advocating for yourself or being assertive. We all do these things on different levels. But I appreciate how you brought that up. That is so foundational when you're talking about trauma, to really understand those I am messages that we carry, and then eventually shifting them, but still having, in the very beginning, identifying those beliefs, like yours is, the less I required of her, the easier I'd be to love. We all have something it can be I'm unlovable, I'm a burden, I'm not safe. All of these different things that stemmed from something else. And until we work through those and those layers, then our relationships will continue to suffer. And I really appreciate how you could speak to that so people can understand that, and also share how you're seeking to heal from it so that you don't go back to those same patterns. And not only, you haven't said it right now on this episode, but you said it to me, not only for yourself, but to model that for your children and to change the trajectory of your life. I think that's so beautiful, Abbie.
Thank you.
Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners? Again, it's painful to have it done here, but chances are very high I'll have you on again soon, if you're willing.
Yeah, I am willing. It is hard not to deep dive into some of these other topics with you, because it is something that I'm feeling so passionate about right now. I do think it's cool that you're feeling kind of called to do the same thing. And I'll just tell you that it went really well, and I feel 10 times closer to Mom and our sister than I ever have. So it was a huge release for me, and I know I'm on the right track in my healing. I just feel it in my gut, and I'm just really leaning into trusting myself fully. I was always questioning my intuition and always questioning my knowing, and I'm really paying attention to my body and what my body is telling me, and when I'm around certain people or in certain situations, and I'm being respectful of it. I think for the first time, I'm respecting my own boundaries, or that I didn't even know I had, the boundaries that my body is saying, hey, this is a boundary for me. I'm actually listening for the first time, and it feels really good. And I just know I'm on the right track. I would just really want to encourage everyone, but especially women, to listen to themselves and to trust themselves, and to know that they are so wise, and our bodies are wise, and we just need to be willing to listen and to honor and respect it. And I guess that's where I'd want to leave it.
That is a beautiful place to leave it. And I want to just reiterate that again. Listen to yourself and trust yourself. So not easy. And you have to get still. And that's, as you know, Abbie, that can be hard for me. I'm like an overachiever sometimes, right?
Sometimes.
That's a good point. I'm always an overachiever. But yeah, being still and allowing space to feel these things and process these things and heal from these things, even if you feel like you've done the work. Because I know that we've talked about this many times. Like, you thought you did the work, and now even going back to that past episode, like, it was almost laughable to you. Like, I thought that I was, and now I'm like, oh no, and now I'm really leaning into this. And I think that's what we're all are trying to do. Sometimes it's a much longer process than we think. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really loved it. I always love having you. I wanted to have you in person, but I didn't know how we can both stare at the camera with my current setup. So appreciate you doing video with me today. And in the future, this will be available on YouTube should any of you want to go and watch the video version as well as listen to it. So that will be coming. But thank you again, Abbie.
Thank you so much for listening. If you or anyone you know needs help with domestic violence, please call 800-799-7233 or text BEGIN to 88788. If you need any more resources, visit to our website, fulfillmenttherapy.org. We hope this episode has been transformative for you, and hopefully will help you in your journey towards your ultimate fulfillment. Thank you for listening.